Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Today we are looking at engaging contractors and what you need to do to, I suppose, ensure your compliance. Now, this is sort of part two of my two-part seminar. Last webinar, we looked at engaging employees. From time to time, a lot of people will come to me about engaging contractors. So the background for this particular presentation was one that I took down to our Riverina and South Coast Trade Nights, which got a lot of positive feedback. So what we're going to be doing today, and let me just make sure that this is working, is essentially going through how to engage a contractor correctly. Now, as with all of my presentations and any trade night presentation that I give, I'll always put in a disclaimer. This is all general advice only, and you should seek specific advice regarding your situation in any event. That could either be from, say, myself as a workplace advisor or a solicitor. Now, today, the list of things that we're going to go through looks exhaustive. I promise it's not as bad as it seems, and we only have an hour to talk about it. But what I'm going to do is, I suppose, just go through a common scenario. You're a member that's spoken to me on the phone. You've said to me, look, I'm wanting to engage a contractor. These are all of the different things that I will run you through should you ever phone me up on the phone. Now, importantly, we need to look at ensuring that there's a genuine contract arrangement in place. We'll also then look at what information you should obtain from the contractor prior to them commencing work on your site. Then we'll sort of look at other general business information. I'll sort of bust some myths about insurances, touch on contracts and the extension of the statutory warranties under the Home Building Act, and then again touch on some WHS documentation requirements. If you have any questions, jot them down as we're going along and then type them in the box, and Kerry can read them out at the end. I'm happy to sort of help along the way. So the first question is, are you engaging a contractor? Now, there are so many benefits with engaging a contractor, as there are with engaging an employee, depending on your situation. But the first dot point that I've got there just means that they're not an employee. This is great because you don't have to sort of worry about issuing them with pay slips, looking after their taxes, those sorts of things. Now, we'll touch on that a little bit later. But, you're essentially not taking them on as an employee, and that could be a benefit for your business. The next one is, they hit the ground running. You don't have to train them to do their job. They just get on with the task that you've engaged them to do. Sometimes they'll have, skill or expertise that's required to complete that task that somebody within your organisation might not have. So you might be a building company. You don't have a plumber on the books, but you subcontract the plumbing works out to the plumber. They hit the ground running, they've got the skills and expertise, the tools and, all of the materials, then they can get the job done for you. The next dot point says that they supply the goods and the labour. That could also be, the materials. This is, I suppose, one of the common law elements of, determining whether or not a person is a genuine contractor. The last dot point there, is important for all of us as builders, that the contractor is responsible for the work that they do for you. Going through some of the common law principles later on in this presentation, this dot point will make a little bit more sense. But essentially what this dot point means is you're not going to be responsible. Yes, you are responsible under your building contract to your client, but there's also liability on the subcontractor undertaking the works for you to come back in and rectify under the Home Building Act. So now we move on and we look at what the key considerations are. So these are all quite important, and of course these are sort of the questions that I'll ask people if they come to me, with an engagement type scenario. And the other thing is, I also ask these questions so as to gauge, I suppose, your knowledge in terms of engaging another person to undertake works for you. So first and foremost, we need to ensure that they're independent. Do you know if they're independent? We'll go through what independent means in a little while. Then we need to know what information should you get from them to ensure that you're, complying with your legal requirements. What should they be providing to you so as to satisfy you that they are compliant with their obligations, so on and so forth. Now, ultimately, your business is your livelihood. What we want to ensure is that you should be doing what you can to protect your business. You don't engage sort of substandard contractors to do your work. The same should apply when looking at, I suppose, engaging a contractor, making sure that they are compliant so as to protect your business and your livelihood. So now we sort of start getting into the nitty-gritty. We've got the question, are they a contractor or an employee? Now, some laws are quite clear on this, but not all of the laws are the same. So, for example, employees and workers and contractors all have different meanings, but in some pieces of legislation might deem them to be all the same. An example of this might be under, say, the New South Wales Workers' Comp legislation, where even a contractor engaged on a regular and systematic basis is deemed to be a worker who is covered by the Workers' Comp, as is an employee. There are a whole stack of factors that we need to consider. Now, these can range from independence, control, risk, who supplies the materials, are they labour only? What we want to look at is whether or not it looks as though the contractor that you're looking to engage is actually running their own business. We do have situations where we've got the same contractor who's been working for, the builder for the last, 15 or 20 years. They've worked for nobody else but the builder. Does that mean that they're genuinely independent, or are they reliant on the builder? These are sort of the questions that I'm encouraging all members to sort of try and start thinking about if they're not already doing it. So then we look at whether a worker is, independent, and we're sort of looking at workers and independent contractors, keeping in mind that there are a number of different factors, taking away, the different pieces of legislation, and sort of looking towards, what the common law says. Now, as it says in the second dot point there's no single factor that determines whether a person is an employee or a contractor. It's made up of a range of factors. Now, we do have particular pieces of legislation which protect the rights and entitlements of independent contractors. We also have, the super payroll award entitlements and those sorts of things which might, apply to a contractor in certain circumstances. It all depends on a case-by-case basis. Now, there is a whole stack of common law out there which will look at, the entire relationship between the parties, look at all the common law factors, have a look at the relevant legislation to then make a determination on whether there is a contract or an employment relationship there. So what I want to do now is just look at them in a little bit more detail. So hopefully you can read this. It's much better than the one that I had previously. And the source of this information actually comes from the Fair Work Ombudsman website. So there's 3 columns to this table. The far left is the indicator, or the common law test that we look at. Then we've got the middle column, which provides information of what would constitute the employment relationship. And then in the far right, we've got what would constitute the independent contractor relationship. So we're going to go through each one, and I'll hopefully give you a couple of examples as we're going along, so it will make a little bit more sense. But sort of a good task for you to do, and it might be as we're going along, you've got a contractor in mind, or it might be afterwards. You might say print off this table and then go through and sort of do a bit of a tick and flick to determine whether or not your contractors are, independent, whether they satisfy all of those things in column on the right, or if they, satisfy those things in the middle column. Now, it's not uncommon for some things to fall under one and then in the other. If there's one side of the table that's sort of filling up, it's not guaranteed, but it's more likely, that, the boxes that you're ticking and the column that you're in would determine the relationship between you and the other person. So if that makes sense, we'll sort of start getting through and going through the different sort of indicators. The first one that we look at is the degree of control over how the work is performed. So as an employee, the employee performs the work under the direction and control of the employer on an ongoing basis. If you're an independent contractor on the other side, the contractor determines how the work is to be done. This could be, at their discretion. It could be in a particular manner in which the work is done that they do, which might be different to how, the principal contractor, says for the work to be undertaken, so on and so forth. So one example might be, I'm an employee of HIA. HIA tells me that I need to answer the phone within 3 rings. As an independent contractor, I might say have something similar, but I can decide that between 11 and 1 I'm having lunch, and if I'm having lunch I don't have to answer the phone within 3 rings. Probably not the best idea, but you sort of get where I'm going with that. The next one is the hours of work. So again, as an employee, we have sort of set hours of work, although a casual employee might vary from week to week. But generally speaking, the employer and employee will agree that work will start and finish 7 a.m. till 3 p.m, 15 minutes for smoko, and then half an hour unpaid lunch. As a contractor though, the contractor will decide on the hours that it's going to take to complete that particular task, and then they'll sort of schedule that into their workload as to when those works are going to be completed. So for example, site's open from 7 till 3. The contractor has another job on, so he might go to site A and then come to your site, at another time during your site opening hours. They get to choose when they're working. If they choose to have a day off, then they choose to have the day off. But, generally speaking, they would, I suppose, be in communication with you to say, they're not going to be on site that day, but it's no requirement. They set the hours that they're going to be working. The next one along is expectation of work. Now, as an employee, generally speaking, we're on an open-ended contract. We're engaged to do task A between the hours of 7 till 3 for an ongoing period of time. Now, with a contractor, it would be attending site A for, you know, the carrying out of the carpentry works, you know, which we've estimated to be 6 weeks worth of work. And then that work is finished. There's no ongoing expectation of the work. This is what we mean by task specific. Now, obviously, if you've, say, entered into an ongoing arrangement with this particular contractor, you know, there might be, you know, that relationship where you get them to come on to a next job. The difference is, you know, that there's no ongoing expectation. You've just developed that commercial relationship to say that, okay, you're going to engage Joe Bloggs to undertake the painting. He's your chosen painter. Yes, you are going to get him on for the next 5 or 10 jobs, but there's no ongoing expectation of work. Joe Bloggs, you know, has made the commercial decision to be a contractor. You know, he sort of feels that you do have the relationship, but if you go out and find another painter who does, you know, as good, if not better, than what Joe Bloggs does, you know, there's nothing stopping you from going out and engaging that person, but for, you know, a moral, you know, reasoning, you know, it's a commercial relationship that you and the contractor have. Okay, so moving on, then we've got risk. Risk is a big one. As a contractor, the contractor would bear the risk, you know, for the works that they're doing. Obviously, if they stuff the job up, you know, they're going to be liable for the cost of rectification, which is then going to eat into their profit. And, you know, if it eats too much into their profit, you know, they might suffer a loss. Now, we do have, like, the contractor should have insurances in place, which we will discuss a little bit later. But ultimately, they bear the risk for the cost of the job, their works that they're undertaking for you. As an employee, though, the employee wouldn't necessarily bear a financial risk. They don't have to be responsible for the works that they're doing. That would ultimately be the responsibility of their employer. Say, for example, you've got a decking company. You've got an apprentice who cuts the decking boards 20 mil shorter than what they need to be. As the employee, the employer would be obviously getting pretty shirty because he's done this to 20 pieces of decking. And, you know, the cost of that and, you know, where, you know, materials are running short or they're getting near the end of the job or it's a special order or something like that, you know, it's the employer that bears that risk. If it was a contractor coming in, you know, the contractor would bear the risk. Hopefully that makes sense. The next thing that we look at is the entitlement to super. Now, this is not so much controversial, but I think there's further understanding that's required. The ATO have gone to, I suppose, greater information and education in regards to superannuation, and they have what's called the super guarantee tool. Now, as an independent contractor, in only certain circumstances may they be entitled to paid superannuation contributions. In most cases, they would need to pay their own. Whereas an employee, you know, provided that they meet the minimum thresholds, would be entitled to have, you know, the compulsory super contributions paid into their super fund by their employee. I work for HIA. I'm entitled to having super paid into my super fund by HIA on my behalf because I meet the minimum threshold. As an independent contractor, though, like I said, there's that tool available. Now, it asks a series of questions. You can include, you know, the contractor's name. If you want to do an assessment based on a particular contractor, it will ask you things like, do they have an ABN? Do they do other work for you? Goes through a series of questions. And what it does is it will actually generate an outcome for you. what my recommendation is that if you have done the tick and flick and it's been determined that they're an independent contractor, or in the event where for whatever reason the answers to the questions that you've provided has deemed them to be an employee, either go back through and do the test again, or seek advice from your accountant or a solicitor, but keep a copy of that that outcome, print it off and put it on your file so that you've done your checks and balances at the time that you engaged that person, and this is what the outcome was based on that test. Moving on to tools and equipment. Generally, a contractor will provide all of their own tools and equipment. Now, there are circumstances where an independent contractor, might only provide a particular service, for example. That's fine. But generally speaking, they'll provide everything. If you are engaging them hourly, it might just be worthwhile going back and determining the reasons for engaging them on an hourly rate only. And then just keeping in mind that, if they are engaged on an hourly rate, they might be entitled to, employee entitlements. Tools and equipment for an employee are generally provided by the employer. In the event where you've got an employee who provides their own tools, a tool allowance might be payable. This is the case under the Building and Construction Award. And there are also entitlements for reimbursement if tools need to be replaced and those sorts of things. When we look at tax, this is part and parcel with running a business, but an employee will have income tax deducted from their weekly wages and paid to the tax office on their behalf. Now, obviously, we all know about PAYG tax and those sorts of things. With the contractor, though, the contractor essentially pays their own tax and their GST to the ATO. Now, depending on how they're set up, will depend on, their reporting and those sorts of things. And the other thing is, if your contractor is, claiming the GST on their invoices, you should also make sure that they're registered for GST. Looking at the methods of payment and, the tax and the methods of payment, go part and parcel. The method of payment is regular for an employee. It's done on a weekly, fortnightly or monthly basis. They get a pay slip which says it was paid by EFT transfer on the 17th of August for $1,000, less $50 in tax, $950 was the net. When we are dealing with contractors though, like I said before, they'll issue you with an invoice. This will be either based on a progress payment stage as agreed between you and them, or it will be at the completion of the job, whatever the arrangement is. Then we have a look at, I suppose, the method of payment too. What happens in the event where you're late for payment. This obviously isn't a factor that I've allowed on here, but an employee's expectation would be that in the event where you didn't pay them, they could go to, say, the Fair Work Ombudsman for assistance in the recovery of the payment. With an independent contractor though, there's essentially no regulator for that, and normal debt recovery procedures would follow. That might be by way of a letter of demand, or it might be under the security of payments legislation. So always keep an eye out for that too. When we look at leave entitlements, obviously, depending on the nature of engagement for your employees, you know, more than likely for part-time and full-time employees, they'd be entitled to receive paid leave. Or they could receive a loading in lieu of the paid leave entitlements, i.e. a casual employee receives 25% casual loading in lieu of the paid leave entitlements. An independent contractor, should they choose to take 6 weeks off, doesn't get paid for the leave. You don't need to pay them. That is at a time that they're not sort of earning any money, and that's a commercial decision that they make. Okay, so moving on. We've gone through the process of engaging the contractor. Now we sort of need to look at, you know, what information we should get from them prior to them commencing the works. Now, you all know me, first and foremost, I would like to see you have a contract in place which sets out, you know, the scope of the works that this contractor is going to be doing, provides the details for the payment, you know, is it at the end of the job, is it in regards to particular stages that they complete, so on and so forth. That's the ultimate, you know, first step that I would encourage you to take. Now, other things that we might want to see are contractor licenses. Whilst you are engaging them, you know, residential building works, you know, in New South Wales that are being performed by tradespersons, you know, and are over the sum of $5,000, you know, the guys that are doing this work should be licensed. You'll know from, you know, your experiences, you know, if you've got somebody that's, you know, been around forever, they don't do any residential building work, but they contract direct to you as the builder, and, you know, many other builders as well, and don't ever work for, you know, the clients directly, you know, they might not have a license. My advice to you is, you know, that if a person has a license, in order to obtain that license from New South Wales Fair Trading, they would have had to have shown that they were, you know, suitably qualified to have obtained that contractor license. In the ACT, it's a little bit different. We just need, we being a principal contractor, you know, the person engaging the subcontractor, would just need to ensure that they were able to, you know, complete the work satisfactorily. There's no trade licenses here in the ACT. The other, you know, important thing is making sure that they've got a white card. It might sound silly, white cards have been around for ages, but, you know, it's part and parcel with working on a construction site. It's part of the obligations under the WHS legislation in both the ACT and New South Wales. And there are also fines which apply, you know, should, you know, WorkSafe ACT or Safe Work New South Wales walk on site and, you know, see or ask for a white card, and the person turns around and says that they don't have one. Other, you know, other sort of requirements for a person to get on site might be, you know, an asbestos awareness training course to have been completed. So, for example, here in the ACT, it's mandatory. Most people now have a card to say that, yes, they've done the white card and the asbestos awareness. Other safety licenses, such as, you know, those licenses for performing high-risk work, operating a forklift, you know, dogging, rigging and scaffolding, using a crane or pressure equipment. If a contractor that you're looking to engage has that as part of the scope of their works that they're doing for you, make sure you obtain copies of their licenses. From a risk mitigation point of view, you've done your due diligence in, you know, checking that these guys are suitably competent and licensed to undertake these works. This then, you know, sits in your folder or your WHS management plan or your, you know, register of licenses, training and information to say that Joe Bloggs is coming on site, he's done his white card, he has a contractor license for plumbing, for example, and he's also got a high risk work license for XYZ. Then we look at copies of insurances. Insurances are important. Now, there are some myths around the insurances that should be provided. What I want to do is hopefully, extinguish those myths, but also look at, those situations, that probably could have been avoided, had a builder, checked for the insurances at the time that they'd engaged a contractor. Now, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here, but I will, in a later slide, just so that we can sort of have a little bit more detailed discussion. WHS documentation is also important. You as the person conducting the business or undertaking need to ensure that your WHS documentation is up to scratch. Obviously, if, the person that you've engaged is doing, high risk work, requires a safe work method statement, you want to ensure that, they provided you with a copy of that, for example. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So as a principal contractor, these are the different things that you should be checking. Now, obviously we've discussed the licenses, ABNs for all businesses. The website provided there will allow you to plug in, an ABN number or a business name to make sure that they are registered. We also want to make sure that, when we're doing that search, that whatever number or business name that we put in there, matches what, the contractor has provided to you. And then underneath it will say whether or not they're actually registered for GST. Keeping in mind that in the event where a contractor, doesn't provide you with an ABN or isn't registered for GST, in the first instance, if they haven't provided you with an ABN, then the laws require you to withhold 48.5% of the invoice and remit it to the ATO. In the event where the contractor is not registered for GST, they can't charge you for GST. So also be mindful of that. We had an interesting situation. It was just after I first started at HIA actually, and a member had a bit of a funny gut feeling about one of his contractors. He issued an invoice and just wanted to double check that the invoice sort of had met the requirements, under the laws. Now, just as a matter of principle, we did a quick ABN lookup, and it turned out that the ABN number provided was actually different to, the contractor's business, and actually turned out to be the ABN for McDonald's. So, unfortunately for, the principal contractor, he had, paid the invoice already, and I can't remember how much it was worth, but it was quite a bit of money. The guy had provided, the incorrect details. He'd obviously gotten away with, the entire amount, but, it's important to check. We also have, the taxable reporting payments now that we do. As a part of the process, obviously you enter in all of your contractor details there. It might just be, when you're taking on a new contractor or even for your existing contractors, that you go through and just double check that the info that's provided is accurate. This next document here is what we call the subcontractor statement. Now, not everybody uses these. It's my recommendation that you do, if you can. These are available on the New South Wales Government website. And what it is, it's a statement from your contractor to say that they have, done works between a particular period, and in relation to their payment claim being whatever date it is, they've said that they have paid their employees for their work done, during that particular time. They've ensured that any payroll tax obligations have been met, and, they've also paid, their workers' comp, and that's up to date. If you don't use them already, it's my recommendation that you do start using them so that you can just, ensure that your contractors are also doing the right thing. So now we look at insurance. Like I said before, I want to talk about this in a little bit more detail. Genuine contractors, should have, some sort of insurance policy to cover their own risks. Now, the basic ones are your public liability insurance, and then depending on your contractor, whether they're set up as, say, a sole trader or if they're a company, either the workers' comp or a personal accident and sickness insurance, should be in place. Now, looking at public liability, this insurance is there to cover the business against claims for personal injury to a third party or damage to a property owned or controlled by somebody else. Generally speaking, public liability is 5 million, 10 million, depending on what your contract is. If you've got a head contract, with a person that you're doing the work for, the public liability insurance amount is generally stipulated in that contract. What my recommendation is that you double check what that amount is, and then ensure that, your contractors are also providing the same public liability insurance for the required amount also. Now, we also recommend that you seek evidence and make the public liability insurance a requirement of, the contractor's engagement with you. What we want to ensure is that you're protected as the principal contractor, but also that the subcontractor that you're engaging can also be held liable for any, damage to property or injury to a third party that's caused by them. When we look at, the next two dot points, either the workers' compensation insurance or the personal accident and sickness insurance, it would depend on the situation, as I mentioned before. So, for example, if you're engaging a contractor who's a company, they would generally have a workers' compensation policy in place, for their workers. This would also be the case if you engaged me as a sole trader and I had an apprentice working for me. The workers' comp policy wouldn't cover me, but it would be there to cover my apprentice. If you've got a sole trader that is working for you or engaged by you to undertake, certain works, and they do have employees, make sure that you get a copy of their workers' comp policy. If they don't have one, bring it to their attention because they're actually in breach of the Workers' Comp Act. Now, if you've just got a sole trader who, is, just turns up with his trailer, doesn't have anybody that works for him, whilst it's not mandatory, you would want to see that he's got some sort of personal accident and sickness insurance in place. In the event where he works for you on a regular and systematic basis, it might be worth you noting him on your workers' comp policy, because in the event where, and touch wood, this doesn't happen, he's injured on your site, he might potentially have a claim against you or your insurance. Now, a little while ago, I had a member come to me, and they had an instance where it was a sole trader arrangement. There was 3 of them, so there was the principal contractor, the sole trader, and the sole trader's apprentice. Now, they all went to work on a Saturday. it was a windy day, and what happened was the part of the building works that they were working on actually blew over in the wind and ended up, crushing this sole trader's leg in the process. He ended up in hospital. Now, before he started the work, this principal contractor was, quite good at ensuring that he got copies of the insurances and those sorts of things before the contractor started. The apprentice was injured, but was able to make a claim under the sole trader's workers' comp, which was the correct thing to do. Now, what happened was, whilst it's not mandatory, the sole trader's personal accident and sickness insurance had lapsed because he hadn't paid it. Now, this guy was unfortunately in hospital for quite some time and was off work and not able to work. And, he was able to, make a claim against the principal contractor's workers' comp policy. The reason for doing so was because it was deemed that he was working for them on a regular and systematic basis and entitled to coverage under that policy. So, whilst we say, make sure that they get the insurance, also be vigilant of your obligations as an employer. Also, as a principal contractor, where you engage your contractors, and just be mindful to also obtain updated copies of insurances, where during the project, that insurance policy has the end date. Make sure that you get that updated. On the next, not the next slide, but the slide after, I'll show you sort of a great tool that can be used so as to obtain that sort of information and keep a record of it. So you all know me, contracts is my bread and butter. First question I ask is, do you need a contract? The answer is always going to be yes. It's preferable that you do have a written contract, because the contract creates certainty, sets out, the terms and conditions of the work to be undertaken, and may be used to either prevent or to help you out in the event of a dispute. Now, with the HIA trade contracts, and I'm not sure if any of you use them, but we have two available. Now, the first one is the project trade contract, which is the one on the left. The second one is the period trade contract, which is the one on the right. Now, project trade is project specific and, will allow you to sort of set out your scope of works, the time frame for the completion of the works, how the payments are to be made to the contractor, and then most importantly, on the back of this page, it's then got your terms and conditions. Now, just a little while ago, I mentioned to you about the insurance information. Now, in the grey boxes, sort of 3/4 of the way down the page, on both contracts, that provides for you to obtain a license number, to obtain the insurance details, public liability, workers' comp, and personal sickness and accident insurance details. It also provides for a place where the contractor can provide their ABN. This is, I suppose, a great tool to use, and you can keep that, on the desk. You can say, Christy has a public liability insurance policy with insurance company. The policy number is 1234, and it's current to the 31st of August 2018. Now, coming around to the 31st of August, you might say have a calendar note that says, get Christy's updated public liability insurance. This is where this tool can become really handy for you. And then you can check that I, as your contractor, have insurances in place. So now jumping over to the period trade contract. This is a contract that can be used for, a contract relationship, where you might use the same plumber or, the same carpenter or plasterer, on a regular basis. Now, what we want to make sure is that, we're still ensuring that there is a genuine contractor arrangement. But this allows you to issue a work order for the works that are to be done by this particular contractor. My recommendation is that we have a period trade contract in place for no longer than 12 months. The reason being is that, prices might change. We might have, another, contractor, that might pop up in the meantime. It also provides, that maximum period of time so that you can reevaluate, your position after 12 months, obtain updated insurances and those sorts of things, so that you're not locked in indefinitely. Now, the benefit of both of these contracts is we've also got a defects liability period. Now, this will mean that, again, going back to our common law, principles, determining who's responsible for what and the risks associated. Again, contractors bear the risk for the work that they undertake, and you have the power to set out a defects liability period as you would have under your contract for, the subcontractor to come back and rectify any defective works. So then we look at the warranties. I've sort of just run through point number 1. Warranties to the contractor's work now extend, under the Home Building Act. This was a change that came in, and it's not new. It's been around, for a little while now. But essentially, the extension of the statutory warranties that apply to you as a builder for residential building works also extend to a contractor. Now, we do have issues where, a contractor might refuse to come back and do the works. In the event where, you're in that situation, please give us a call because we can help. It's not that we can force the contractor in coming back. And, obviously we can't provide advice where, the contractor is a member as well. But, we have a letter which can, put the contractor on notice that there's an issue with their work, they need to come back and fix it, and provides a couple of different options for them in doing so. One of those might be that you engage somebody else and they bear the costs of you engaging the other person to fix their work, for example. There are consequences for a breach of the warranties. So my advice is just to maintain, the lines of communication, but if there are issues, that you bring them up, as soon as they become an issue, as opposed to leaving them to the end of the job. That contractor might have moved on to another job, and then, chances of them coming back, might be greatly reduced, which then has an impact on your handover, and, then you don't want to sort of implicate your, contract with your client in any way. Now, safe work method statements, I touched on this before. So this is a requirement for any high-risk work as defined in the legislation. Now, that might be working at heights, where there's a risk of a person falling more than 2 meters. It might be where there's asbestos or the disturbance of asbestos, near energised electrical installations or services, where work is carried out on, in or adjacent to a road that is used by traffic, where there's a movement of any plant, so on and so forth. Now, the person conducting the business or undertaking, the PCBU, or you as a principal contractor, need to make sure that the SWMS is prepared or has already been prepared by someone else before that high-risk work is actually undertaken. Now, keep in mind that, yes, you are the principal, contractor, the person conducting the business or undertaking, but a subcontractor is also a PCBU in their own right. So in the event where they're the electrician, they're working with an energised electrical source, it's likely that they will provide you with their safe work method statement. You should check that you know, first of all, it's specific to your site, but also that they are, you know, undertaking their works in accordance with that safe work method statement. Don't forget your obligations as a PCBU under the WHS will still apply. You need to make sure that if your subcontractor is promised to do something in the safe work method statement, that they're actually doing it. So that's the information that I have for you today. It's not meant to be exhaustive. It's just meant to, I suppose, trigger those thoughts and to, I suppose, give you something to work with when considering taking on contractors. We want to ensure that you're doing it correctly. Your business is your livelihood, and we all know that disputes can be expensive, they're time consuming, and we want to ensure that, you know, we're getting the information out there that, you know, helps you to keep doing the job that you love doing with minimal risk, and, you know, just to improve the, I suppose, the efficiency of industry as a whole. So I'll open it up for questions now, but if you do have any other questions that you want to talk to me about offline, these are my contact details here.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that, Christy. Fiona's asking, can they get a copy of the slides?
Yes, certainly, certainly.
Great, and I can. What I'll do, I'll grab a copy of you and I will email those out to everyone. If everybody would like a copy, just if you could just let me know in the chat box if you'd like a copy, because sometimes those files are quite big. So if it's just a couple of people who want a copy of the slides, I can just put them, send them out individually. Otherwise, I'll drop them in an email to everyone. But I know there's a lot of information. There's always a lot of stuff in your presentations, Christy. So sometimes it's best to, if people can get a copy of that, they can sort of have a read through it as well. And then also I'll have the recording up on the website shortly, as I said. And if there's other people in your office that you'd like to, you know, show that to, by all means, other members of staff can also watch those videos. We have over 40 now, as I said, so once I send that link through, you can see some of the other ones that are up there. Do we have any more planned, Christy? Well, I don't think we've got any dates at the moment, but were there any other topics you were thinking of covering? Anything that's been happening recently down there?
There are quite a few things that have been happening. Obviously, I'm always in the process of developing things. One of the topics that we have developed is managing contract constructions and clients. And that sort of looks at, you know, your obligations as a builder on site, but also managing your clients' expectations. So that might be a good future webinar for us.
Okay, great. We'll just have to lock in a date, because I know you're always pretty busy. And are you back out on the road again shortly, or doing any more trips out to the region? What's that, sorry?
There are some trade nights scheduled for September.
Okay, so if members want to go along to those, they can just have a look on the website and see where they are on at, or are they on at the office there?
Have a look at the website, but also keep an eye on e-news, because further info as the rooms are booked and those sorts of things will be distributed to members. But keep an eye out on e-news and on your email.
Great. Okay, well, I don't think we have any questions. If anybody has a question other than about the slides, if you could quickly type it in, otherwise we will wrap it up. It's coming up to 2 o'clock. Was there anything else that you wanted to add, Christy? I know actually there was a document you showed that you recommended people use, and I think you said you could download it from the government website.
That's correct, the subcontractor statement. What I'll do is I will forward you a copy of the links, Kerry. And
that would be great.
A copy, and then when we send out the slides, we can send out a copy of that subcontractor statement too.
Okay, great. I think that would be really handy as well for everyone, save them having to search around. So, alrighty, I think we will wrap it up. Thanks again, Christy, for giving up your time this afternoon. And I really appreciate all the members jumping on today. As Christy said, if you do think of any other questions later, or if it's on perhaps a different topic altogether, you've got her details there on the screen. That's what we're here for. So please, if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to send them through. And Christy, you have a great Friday afternoon down there in
Thank you.
beautiful Canberra. And to all our members, I hope everybody has a great weekend as well. Thanks, Christy.
Great. Thanks, Kerry. Bye, everyone.
Bye.